My name is Rupert Collister and I live in Toronto in Canada, and my background is in adult education and administration. My main areas of interest is the nexus between adult learning, community, sustainability, meaningful work and leadership. And I explored those themes in my doctoral thesis, which I later turned into a book. And now I'm starting to explore them again from a slightly different angle. But my interest in the reason why I'm here at this conference was to present a session about my version of what I call contemplative pedagogy. There are quite a lot of people now who talk about contemplative pedagogy and believe that they undertake work like that. In my view, there's kind of three groups of people in this area. There's the teacher who undertakes some kind of contemplative practice themselves and believe that that infuses everything that they do. There's the teachers that encourage their students to undertake some form of contemplative practice, meditation, often mindfulness meditation, at the beginning of the class or before stressful type situations, exams, tests and such like. And then there's the last group of people, which I believe I am, or at least I'm working towards, which is to infuse the learning experience with a whole range of practices which are in and of themselves contemplative. The sort of rationale behind what I do is I want the coursework, whatever the course is, to be related to the real life experience of the students. So what I'm interested in mostly is for the students to understand who they are, how they exist in the world, and the effects of their attitudes, beliefs, actions, etc. have on the people and the world around them. And to do this, I situate them within an emergent holistic frame of reference. So we talk about the patterns that exist in life. So that's the smallest patterns in the smallest entities to the biggest patterns in the universe. So that's kind of a little background to that. I've been involved in what I call holistic and transformative learning for about 14 or 15 years now. An interest that took hold when I was working with adults in the vocational education and training sector in Australia. These were people who were returning to the workforce after a long absence, perhaps long-term unemployed people, perhaps Aboriginal people, perhaps people with disabilities, people from non-English speaking backgrounds. And my interest in this, what you might call alternative education, was sparked because a lot of what was going on in vocational ed at the time was pretty much like school. And most of these people didn't have a good experience at school. So vocational education can be transformative because it gives people an opportunity to change their lives. But when it's delivered, offered in a mode that's very much like school, for these people who've been out of school for a long time and perhaps didn't have a very positive experience, then that's a negative transformation. In fact, I believe that learning is inherently transformative, but it's the context in which that learning is situated which determines whether that transformation is positive or not. I think it's the role of educators of all types to create an environment that makes that positive transformation possible. I had a realization a while ago that that kind of informed how I went about organising this course. And the realization was around this. When I worked in the vocational education sector, All those people started in some kind of industry, and then they moved into teaching because they wanted to impart their knowledge and experience to somebody else. They wanted to be able to give people an opportunity. And they loved teaching. But most of the people I came across discovered that once they started working in that area, although they loved teaching and they loved giving people positive opportunities for learning, they hated the environment in which they had to work. Vocational education was very financially oriented. People bid to teach courses, organisations bid to teach courses. The courses often go to the person who bids lowest. They try and spend as little as possible, and subsequently the learning experience often isn't that positive. So these teachers, although they loved teaching, they hated the environment in which they had to work. Last year when I was teaching this course, as I mentioned, all the students were teachers or principals, vice principals, board people, and even the people who weren't teaching now had been teachers. And over the course of the course, I had them write a reflective journal. I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. And what came out was these people, to a man, to a person, loved teaching. They loved imparting their knowledge and experience to their students, and they loved it when the students could grasp a concept. But they hated the environment in which they had to work. For various reasons. Sometimes it was their colleagues, sometimes it was the fact that they felt overworked, sometimes it was new initiatives and policies being pushed down from the top, budgets, a whole range of reasons. But to a person, they loved their teaching, but they hated the environment in which they had to work. And I sort of caught on to this recurrent theme. And having had before I moved into education, having had a career in industry, which is very stressful and and which facilitated a real negative transformation in myself and in pretty much everybody I came across, I'm aware of the toxic nature of a lot of work environments. So, in teaching this course in educational administration, what I wanted to do was approach it from a position that was healthy, a position whereby these students, when they go into their workplace, would be able to look after themselves, look after their own health and well-being, so that they could look after their students' health and well-being, so that together the health and well-being of the organisation would be enhanced. There were a number of elements that we explored. The first one was all the students were asked to undertake some form of contemplative practice, 15 minutes every day, and write a reflective journal about it. Journals were submitted 4 times during the course, not for marking but for feedback, and I gave them extensive, detailed feedback on their journal. That was an interesting exercise for a number of reasons, not least because in the initial stages many of the students didn't seem to have much experience of reflective writing or journaling. So we did some work on that. Now, some of the students had done some contemplative practice before, some hadn't, and I wasn't prescriptive about what they did, so they could do anything. And we had all sorts of things. We had people doing a range of Eastern meditation techniques. We had somebody who would sit by a river on his property and engage in contemplative practice with the water. We had somebody who was working with their horses in a contemplative way. We had somebody who was playing piano. Various things. We had one guy who took a while to find his practice, but when he did, it was spending time being fully present with his newborn baby. And that was his practice. So a very rich experience, and the journals ultimately provided very, very deep personal reflections on people's experience. And the task was to undertake this practice and write this journal on the effects of their contemplative practice in their, or lack thereof, in their daily life. And over the course of the course, over the time of the course, many, not all, but many of the students really found that their way that they understand themselves and the way that they understood the context in which they work and the way they related to the people in their lives changed in a more positive way. So that was the first element, and that was a big element. We also undertook some contemplative practice in class, usually just focusing on the breath for a few minutes at the beginning of class, and then a loving kindness meditation. And over the time of the course, students actually found themselves, without realizing it often, giving loving kindness to people who they came across, who they felt needed it. People at work, people on the street, people who cut them off in the traffic. So that was a very positive experience and quite a surprise to a number of people. And in class we engaged in a lot of circle work. And one of the things we did was to allow people to talk about their experience of contemplative practice each week. They didn't have to do that, but they could, and we usually got half a dozen people talk about that. And these were deeply moving, deeply reflective sessions in a classroom community that was very supportive. And we got all sorts of things emerged from that that was very positive. Some kind of multimedia object, something that related to the themes of the course that we were touching on at the time, and something that would make the group think deeply. I used some PowerPoints, and I used some videos, and most of the videos came from something called the Global Wholeness Project. Global Wholeness Project has got amazing videos on a whole range of subjects related to learning and community and leadership and sustainability and a whole range of other themes. So they're engaging in contemplative practice to understand who they are and how they exist in the world. We were exploring their contemplative practice in class in a supportive environment. We were engaging with these media files in a way that both broadened their thinking and made them think more deeply about life and work. And then we engaged in a circle process based on the work of Parker Palmer, but also based on the work of Kroll, Kane and Kane. And this circle process really was an opportunity for people to reflect and provide a thought, a question, an idea, something that they were forming in their head in a supportive environment. So there was some protocols around the circle, and those protocols were basically that somebody would speak from the heart. Everybody would listen, everybody would be fully present. After they'd spoken, there'd be some silence, then we'd move on to the next person. There was no crosstalk. Person A didn't talk about what person B had said. You just gave forth your own idea, question, thought to the room. And although there was no discussion about those things, that provided an opportunity for a very deep sharing, and we were building new knowledge. And what we were exploring there was some aspect of the content from that week's work in relation to the context, the professional context in which the students found themselves, in relation to one of a number of statements of holistic thinking. Statements like, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, the inside and the outside reflect each other, the whole is visible in the parts, and such like. There's 8 of those statements. And so what that did was that allowed the students to connect the theory, the course theory, with their personal experience, but in a broader holistic framework. Finally, we had an element that I call collaborative conversation. So this was a place where we would just explore all the stuff that had come up throughout all the other activities. So perhaps stuff related to their contemplation, perhaps stuff related to the video media file, perhaps stuff related to their reflections, perhaps whatever. And these collaborative conversations allowed us to build new knowledge in the community of the group. Another element was I provided each week some questions, between 4 and 8 probably questions, that the students undertook on their own. They didn't submit them for marking. And these were questions that required them to think deeply about themselves, their context, and the content. So when we were talking about worldviews, for example, there were questions about the worldview of their organisation, questions about their worldview, and this kind of thing. Questions that really made them actually think deeply, again, about who they are, how they exist in the world, and the effects of their attitudes and behaviours. So all the time we were approaching those 3 questions within the context of within their professional context, in relation to the content, in a number of different ways. Through contemplation, through deep reflection and journaling, through questioning, through collaboration, all the time gaining a deeper understanding of who they are, how they exist in the world, and the effects of their attitudes and behaviours. In the second half of the course, we also undertook appreciative inquiry. Each student undertook an appreciative inquiry in their own context, and we also undertook an appreciative inquiry of the course. Now, you can't rush an appreciative inquiry, and there was no pressure for them to actually finish the inquiry. What I was interested in here was their engagement, their understanding of what appreciative inquiry is, their engagement with the process, and their reflections on their experience of the process. And we explored their appreciative inquiries each week in the second half of the course. Some of the things that were interesting was I wasn't bothered whether they completed the inquiry or not. I was just interested in their engagement and their depth of reflection on the process. And that proved to be quite a challenge for some students. So there was a few students who wanted to know, all the way through really, what do I need to do to pass? how do I get an A? Can I have an exemplar of what you want here? And in fact, because every assignment task, everything that they did, everything they did in class and everything they did out of class related to the assignments, was an exploration of the three things I keep coming back to: who they are, how they exist in the world, how their attitudes and beliefs affect the world around them in relation to the content, educational administration and leadership, and in relation to their professional context. So, in many cases there is no right answer. This was just a journey to deepen and broaden their understanding of themselves and the context in which they work.